Order, order. Sitting will now resume. Mr. Paul Maynard.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship on, for, I think, the first occasion. Now, members may wonder why we are having yet another debate on high-speed rail. They may, but we're not, actually. We're having a debate on high-speed rail in the north. So let me explain why I have called this debate. Partly because I felt that when we had a debate in the main chamber a couple of weeks ago, we didn't have enough contributions from the north, I felt. So I wanted to rebalance the equation, rather. But I actually don't want to debate the merits of HS2 today. I actually don't really want to have to talk about anything south of Birmingham, if I can help it. So I want the focus to be on the north. And when I say the north, I don't stop at the Scottish border. I deliberately use the phrase north to encourage Scottish members to participate also. I also want to try to make it clear what the terms of the debate are and what they are not. I have used the phrase high-speed rail in the north, i.e. not high-speed as under high-speed 2, which to my mind is ultra-high speed, but actually looking at high-speed rail as a concept. And equally, can I make a plea at the start of this debate for a slightly more consensual style than we have had on many previous debates, perhaps. I know that new infrastructure projects do excite high passions, understandably, and campaigns where you wander into PMQs wearing a colourful badge that no one can read on TV, let alone members in the House looking, I don't think benefits either set of arguments, and indeed diminishes the dignity of the House. But that doesn't mean to say that we have to accept some mushy consensus about infrastructure projects. So I do accept that we will disagree, but I hope we can do so in a polite and measured term. Now, if you were to give me billions of pounds to spend on transport in the north of England, would I immediately reach for high-speed rail links to London? Perhaps not. It's interesting to note that back when the Northern Way Transport Compact first got going in 2006-07, it didn't mention high-speed rail at all, because it simply wasn't on the agenda. Indeed, the Northern Way has always focused on improved connectivity within the north of England, rather than between the north and the south. And indeed, it's highlighted the importance of the Trans-Pennine corridor. And the switch the government made from the S route to the Y route, I think only serves to emphasise the importance of the Trans-Pennine corridor and what we do with the Woodhead tunnels. I would also welcome just a bit of reassurance from the Minister over the Northern Hub. Even if it is to be delivered, even if it is to be delivered in parts, can't you reassure me that the sum of the parts will still equal the whole of the vision? I do trust it will do. Now, we should also, I think, need to consider in what ways we differ from our European counterparts. If I think of the Liverpool-Manchester metropolis, it reminds me rather of the Rhine-Ruhr Gebiet in Germany, a heavily industrialised urban area. But the one difference between ourselves and the Rhine and the Ruhr is the comparatively poor public transport links we have in these metropolises in this country. So I do think that we can learn a lot just by looking at Germany for a change. Now, I have no shortage of material for this debate. I could probably speak for an hour and a half without trying anyway, and I promise you I have no intention of doing that. So what I want to try to do is just take a step back and look at some of the more thematic policy issues that I think any decision to proceed with any form of high-speed rail north of Birmingham has on government policy making. What I don't want to see are half-baked solutions to other people's political timetables. Now, the quality of policy making is to my mind crucial. It's what I came into politics to try to improve. I think we are very bad in this country, no matter what party is in power, at the quality of the detail of our public policy making. And that existing quality we have in our understanding of transport in the north of England is, to my mind, entirely due to the work the Northern Way has done over the past 5 years. And I mourn its loss greatly. I don't blame the government entirely for that. I think it's a shame that many of the local actors who had the chance to fund it after the closure of the RDAs didn't take the opportunity to do so. But the loss of the Northern Way has meant one fundamental problem has now occurred, which is that we have lost that pan-northern perspective. We have lost the ability to weigh up the differing priorities of Yorkshire and the North West and the North East. and we are seeing a retreat back into a list of regional priorities where Manchester wants one thing and Liverpool wants another and Leeds wants another. And there is no one necessarily trying to pull those together to say, well, yes, yours is slightly better than this one. I do think we need some form of coordinating body that allows those prioritisations to occur. Now, as someone who participated in the Transport Select Committee inquiry into high-speed rail, and gosh, it was a mammoth undertaking, I can assure you, and I don't think my life will ever be the same again. I know what controversy there has been, not just over the detail of the route, which field it goes through, which field it doesn't go through, how noisy it will be, how quiet it will be, how big this, how small that. We have never seen such controversy, perhaps, on a single infrastructure project. I do think that the debate has been based on a single premise, on a single fallacy, in fact, which is that merely building infrastructure automatically promotes economic growth. It does not do that. It is not a case of build it and they will come. We need only look at what has occurred at the so-called Stratford International station to know that that is not the case. Stratford International railway station in the east of London is remarkable in having no international train services. It's most impressive, I have to say. But the classic example of the sort of white elephant that those of us who do have concerns about levels of public expenditure don't wish to see. Now, when the DFT has been promoting high-speed rail, it's focused on the three L's, Lille, Lyon and Lerida, as examples of how high-speed rail in Europe and investment in it has brought economic growth to the surrounding areas. Equally, for every city that the DFT provides, we have an alternative from the anti-campaign saying, oh, it makes no difference at all, oh, it's a total waste of money, please don't bother. And we end up, it's rather like a sort of Eurovision Song Contest, but on a city basis of nil point for Zaragoza and, you know, 10 point for Brussels. Simply not exactly, I think, informative, shall we say. What matters, to my mind, is not so much the location or the name of the city or even how good its PR effort. It's what the local government in that area has chosen to do in response to the fact that they know they are going to be getting a high-speed rail link. That is the critical variable, which I think is often overlooked in this debate. And as we heard in the evidence to the Select Committee, we have Professor Tomany from Newcastle University who said, and I quote his evidence, the stations themselves do not, on their own, provide these development opportunities. What is required is much larger scale economic development planning. Now, you might think that I, as a Conservative, would go and hide my head under the desk as a consequence of that. Oh, how could he possibly suggest economic planning? What an appalling thing to do. Actually, it is more subtle than that. If you know that you are going to be getting a high-speed rail link coming into, for the sake of argument, the centre of Manchester, you don't have to just deal with issues of dispersal, of an integrated transport system, do the buses interlink, do the suburban trains interlink, but actually much wider policy issues. I would point to housing, I would point to jobs, I would point in particular to skills policy, which I think is often overlooked in any transport planning, because we should be looking at the wider policy sphere and not just issues of transport. And that's, I think, something fundamental, that when the government is moving forward, considering how it is going to progress high-speed rail, it has to look at this on more than just a transport basis. And yes, there are risks. I think it's silly to try to pretend that high-speed rail can only possibly be a good thing, that nothing bad could ever happen with high-speed rail. Returning to the evidence we had at the Select Committee, we had another professor, Professor Roger Vickerman, who made the point that the arrival of the TGV in Lyon and in Lille certainly had benefits for Lyon and Lille. But what it also did was suck in some of the economic activity that went to the cities in the immediate periphery of those two cities. And it may well be that unless the correct decisions are taken at a local level, that high-speed rail could arrive in one city and a neighbouring city or suburb or minor area could well see a diminution in economic activity. And that is a possibility. It is certainly not a given, because there are no givens in this debate, because, I return to what I said earlier, it depends entirely upon the decision-making at a local and regional level. And whether you are a supporter or a detractor of high-speed rail, a friend or a foe of it, you have to agree that this must be part of the debate. And I would argue strongly it has been all too absent in the debate so far. I would certainly. Appreciate it.
John Leach.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. I too was on that visit as a fellow member of the Transport Select Committee, and while we heard that argument being made in Lille, we also heard a counter-argument when we went to Frankfurt that the Frankfurt to Cologne line had actually had a significant impact in terms of improving the whole region, not just the two stations that were actually specifically in a position where they had a station. So they argued very strongly in Frankfurt that we had a whole benefit for the whole region between those two areas.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for that intervention, and he is quite correct, and he makes my point for me almost, that it's horses for courses. We can all point to examples of where high-speed rail has achieved one thing in one area and achieved a different thing in another. I think the most interesting aspect of the German example he points to is the fact that Frankfurt is actually at the confluence, if that's the correct word, of about 4 different Länder within Germany. And so it's actually quite difficult for Frankfurt to have regional planning when the level of the German land at which that tends to occur, the area Frankfurt is in, has about 4 different bodies it has to try and liaise with. And that shows once again first the difficulties, but the fact that if the will is there, the correct decisions can be made that do lead to economic growth. And that's perhaps the challenge we have to face here, which is at what level do we seek to take these decisions? I'm firmly of the view that local transport consortia, or whichever range of acronyms you wish to append to it this week, are crucial for moving forward. And I would welcome some information from the government on how that is progressing. We can point, for example, to Transport for Greater Manchester as a very good example of what can be done. And it's interesting and indeed welcome to see that the differing integrated transport authorities are all moving at what I would now suggest was a slightly different pace in their own particular direction, and standardisation is being lost, and more local sensibility is, I think, occurring, and that can only be a good thing. But it still doesn't resolve the problem that I'm now going to refer to, with apologies to the member for West Lancashire, as the Skelmersdale problem, with no disrespect to that fine town, because Skelmersdale is in the travel to work area of at least 2 major conurbations, Manchester and Liverpool. Yet it is not in either Greater Manchester or Merseyside city regions, it's in the district of West Lancashire. And that to me poses a challenge in terms of transport planning. Because we seem to have a culture in this country that says that you are where you are defined by your boundaries, not by your economic patterns, not by what actually happens in an area. And we also seem to have an unwritten rule that can only be in one club at any one time. You can't be in both a Greater Manchester area and a Merseyside area at the same time. Heaven forfend that that should occur. But that has particular consequences, I would argue, and I hope the Honourable Lady would agree, for her constituents in terms of improving transport links to both the main areas. If she wishes to happily give way.
He absolutely encapsulates the problem my constituents have. A new town of Skelmersdale is this year 50 years old, no railway station, very poor transport links, and is therefore isolated. And yet if we look at the development of high-speed rail, and we could extend that through the northwest, then I think it will bring economic benefits right round, and not just the Skelmersdale part of my constituency, but in the Ormskirk, Burscough area, the Burscough curves, joining lines up to Preston. It is nonsense that we are in the 21st century and subject to being caught between 2 stools, no railway station, no transport links, and therefore losing a huge economic benefit.
Paul Maynard.
I thank the Honourable Lady for that informative intervention. I know there are no shortage of transport proposals in West Lancashire. She hasn't even mentioned the Ormskirk bypass yet, so we could go on and on and on, I am sure. To my mind, city regions seem to have the best potential. I know that they are potentially also controversial. I'm sure many people might not want to see a return to Merseyside, but I do welcome the proposals from both Lord Hazeltine and Terry Leahy that if we are going to have elected mayors covering our great cities, they probably need to cover more than just a particular council of that name. I will happily give way to the Honourable Lady.
Chair, and I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. As a proud Merseysider, I'm afraid I will have to correct him that it still exists, certainly in transport terms. And one of the important things that he's telling us about is that interconnectivity between city regions, covering places like Skelmersdale, like Wirral into North Wales, is one of the most important factors. And actually, there is already some good practice on the ground, certainly in Merseyside, in doing that. And I think, can I ask him if the point that he's making is that we should deal with the realities of people's lives rather than arbitrary decisions that are taken in Whitehall about what councils do or don't exist?
Sorry, could we just keep to the substantive issue in the debate in future when making interventions? Paul Maynard.
Yes, certainly. I agree with her entirely. It should be about people's lives. And if we imagine that high-speed rail is coming into Liverpool, say, that will have an impact on the lives of people outside of the former Merseyside as well as inside it, whether you're in Cheshire, Halton, Skelmersdale or wherever. And we do have to respond to that. But I think what is key is, and the reason, sorry, I'll completely give way.
Narasvich.
Long gentleman for giving way, and turning the focus slightly away from Lancashire and Merseyside for a second. But can I say, well, I think Long gentleman make a very powerful argument for the importance of local networks and making the most of high-speed rail, and that applies in Scotland as well. But would the gentleman agree with me that it is important that the decision is made at an early stage and the commitment is made at an early stage, that the routes do run to Glasgow and Edinburgh, not just because it benefits our areas, but also because that brings particular added value to the communities further south who will gain from the extra business that the extension to Edinburgh and Glasgow will bring to communities all along the line.
Paul Maynard.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for that intervention, and that's precisely why I phrased the debate topic as high-speed rail in the north, because I did mean north as far as Scotland and not just the Scottish border. We do seem to spend a lot of time, as I said earlier, trading cases of where it's worked and where it hasn't. And I have tried to ban the word transformative in my lexicon, because I have got so bored of hearing people tell me that high-speed rail will be transformative. I'm not quite sure in what way or with what evidence, but they just like to say it because it sounds good. But I will happily give way.
Brian Donohoe.
I'm grateful for the member giving way, and I'm also congratulating him in getting this very important debate, because it's an issue that we've been talking about, but there's not been very much action around. And it really, when he talks about the local areas, does he really mean that? Because I think, in actual fact, this will never take part as a programme unless there is a national planning committee to be able to oversee everything about the idea itself.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for that intervention. I spent an hour over lunchtime trying to work out whether I was a Liberal or not, reading the Yellow Book from 1928 called Our Industrial Future. And I actually recommend precisely what he's just said, a National Infrastructure Planning Commission that would actually take these decisions. I think that is all well and good, but I come from a different political tradition. So I discovered I actually was a Conservative after all this lunchtime. Hurrah! Because the reason I am talking so much about the local decision-making is that for high-speed rail to actually have the impact that we all want it to have, in particular rebalancing the economy that I know the government so values, there are decisions that will have to be taken at a local level. And my concern is that if we don't do that, if we don't think about that now, it will not happen either. So I hear what the Honourable Gentleman says, but the tenor of my remarks is designed to draw attention to where I think we need better local decision-making and where the DFT needs to factor those local priorities into its planning. I will try and draw my remarks to a close anyway, because I know that I've been going on for almost 20 minutes now. I would like to see, in particular, the government convene something analogous to the Northern Way. Be it a ministerial committee for transport in the north of England, an advisory group or whatever, but something that will bring together all the different voices in the north to actually understand and reprioritise again. We have a large number of projects that are being proposed with varying benefit cost ratios that we all love to analyse to the nth degree. But we need some way of working out what the pan-northern priorities are. And at the moment, I'm concerned that that won't occur. So I do hope, in conclusion, she may be able to reassure me on that one key point. And I thank everyone for their indulgence in listening to me. Thank you very much.